Those angelic tones you hear in the distance are the sounds of the angels welcoming in Chuck Fletcher to become the new general manager of your Philadelphia Flyers. What a beautiful moment. The black cloud has been lifted. The people are happy once again. The organization is back to being the organization. And Snow the Goalie, of course, is back after a small hiatus. I'm Russ Joy. I'm joined as always by the man who, quite frankly, reports everything first, sometimes gets credit and sometimes does not. But readers of CrossingBroad.com and listeners of Snow the Goalie know he's the most plugged-in guy on the beat. And that, of course, is Anthony SanFilippo, who you can find on Twitter at AntSanPhilly. Anthony. A couple things have happened. Happened since our last podcast.
Yeah, it's been a while, but we've been busy, Russ. I mean, that's part of the thing. I know. Everybody's been looking for the latest edition of Snow the Goalie, but boy, we've been real busy on CrossingBroad.com. We've been real busy with the Press Row Show, and kind of talking about a lot of the things that we're going to discuss again here on the podcast. But yeah, I mean, we've been active. It's not like we've been, not sharing our knowledge and sharing our thoughts with the public. It's just we haven't done it here in the podcast. So now we're finally getting an opportunity to catch up and do that for the listeners of Snow the Goalie.
The only thing I don't like about road trips is it means that you and I are not together, sitting next to each other in Press Row, doing the Press Row Show pregame, first and second intermissions, only on Facebook Live on the Crossing Broad page, and of course via Periscope on Twitter at AntSanPhilly. It is like a nice little thing that we have going on there.
Yeah, I gotta be honest with you. I was out to dinner Monday night with a prominent Philadelphia sports media member, and he said to me, "What you and Russ are doing from Press Row during Flyers games is brilliant." And I cannot believe no one else has picked up on it yet, because you are serving the Flyers fan base better than anyone else in this city is doing that. And this is somebody that's been around for a long time and has a lot of he's real smart media guy. Said that to me on Monday night. So I thought that was, and he brought it up on his own. Like, I didn't bring it up and say, "Hey, did you happen to see it?" He brought it up on his own, and I was pretty happy that I heard that he thought that of us from doing that down at Wells Fargo Center. So
thank you. Thank you, prominent Philadelphia news media person, for your kind words.
Yeah.
So of course, anybody who is missing out on the Press Row Show, make sure that you tune in for it, because I think it has been a really nice way for us to interact with the people who listen to this show on a more regular basis, and of course react in the moment to what's going on in the games. Of course, typically with the pregame show, we cover the big storylines that have happened in between Snow the Goalie episodes, and then as we get down to it, as we get closer to the first puck drop, we get ready for that game specifically, and then first and second intermissions, we react. We don't do post-game because we both go down to the locker room, get the quotes, get things going for the next day, but it's been an enjoyable thing. And so if anybody finds himself having Snow the Goalie withdrawal, don't worry. The Press Row Show is there for you every Flyers home game at Wells Fargo Center. And, by the way, if you're in the area and you just want to say, hey, we're there. So, that's that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And the best part about Press Row Show, I don't want to keep turning this into a commercial for that, but the best part about Press Row Show is we answer your comments and read them out in real time. So while we may have our opinions and things that we want to talk about, if you're commenting and you're asking questions or you have something that you want to say, we will read them out. We read almost every one out. There are a couple times where we get crunched by the time of, we do have to stop when the game's about to start. We're not allowed to be recording as the game is happening, so we do have to stop at a certain point. So there are a few that get lost in the shuffle. But for the most part, I'd say we get to about 85% of the comments that come through. So it's a great way for you to get your opinions out and to get your questions answered and discussed on the program.
Is it better than anything else that's going on radio or TV? We let you decide. We report, you decide. Snow the Goalie, The Press Row Show, Crossing Broad. Here we are. All right. So a few things have happened. You've broken plenty of news. Of course, the last time we did a show, it was in the aftermath of Ron Hextall being relieved of his duties as general manager of the Philadelphia Flyers, and then you wrote a rather scathing expose. Some said it was a little bit too scathing. Some people wondered why things were reported so late, and some people were just flat out happy to hear the other side of the story. Of course, for those who are a little bit rusty in what happened, Hextall gets relieved of his duties in a few years, it felt like years. A few days later, he goes out and he calls an impromptu press conference where he effectively takes most of the things that you had in your piece, and then a couple other people, Jay Greenberg, I think, was one of them, and did Bill Meltzer? I think Meltzer wrote something.
Meltzer, yeah.
Meltzer wrote something up as well. Essentially taking every rumor, anything that could have possibly been taken as critical of him, and he did his best to try to address it, and obviously spin it in his own way to I don't know, make himself sound better. It was funny though, because anybody who watched that, I think if you came away from it feeling better about Ron Hextall and the job that he did, more power to you. But I do think that people who were skeptical of your piece or of Greenberg or of Meltzer or of a combination of any of them, there were entire sections where Hextall would say, well, this thing that happened, that didn't happen that way, but in fairness, I did this. Like the nutritionist comes to mind. He effectively confirmed the rumors while trying to make it sound like it wasn't as bad as it was reported.
Right. So let me just to clarify, because there is a small correction I have to make there. My piece did not actually come out until the day after Hextall's press conference.
Oh, you're right.
The big one. I did have one that did come out beforehand where I didn't get into the specifics, but I kind of hinted to there being other things that took place. And then Meltzer mentioned a couple little things, and Greenberg mentioned a couple little things. And I think Hextall kind of took that stuff and, as you said, kind of addressed it and didn't really deny it, but tried to sugarcoat it a little bit. And I purposely waited until after everybody else put their stories out, because I was kind of curious to see what the narrative was going to be, and I was a little surprised that pretty much everybody was in agreement, other than Meltzer's story and Greenberg's story. I was pretty much surprised that everyone else was supporting Hextall and saying that the Flyers screwed this up and blah, 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 when I knew for a fact, and we had discussed it previously, that there were a lot of issues that were going on within the organization that were not healthy. And that was a direct result of Ron's work as the general manager. So I purposely waited to put the story out until after that press conference. And so there was, I can tell you now that the response that I got to that story was overwhelmingly positive from people with the Flyers, people in the NHL, former players, former members of the media, former coaches. I got so much. Really, I haven't had that kind of positive response to a story I've written in a long time. Just quietly, like people wanting to make sure that they, that I knew that they thanked me for it and they agreed with it and everything else like that. So it was nice to put that story out there the way that I did and to get that kind of feedback, because apparently, and I'll be honest, like I didn't know it was this widely known. Like apparently in hockey circles, like this was a known problem. And, I started to find out about it before Hextall was fired, and then it really kind of came to a head on Black Friday, as you know, and we talked about it on the Press Row show that day. But apparently this is something that had been going on for a long time that a lot of people knew about. A lot of people in the hockey business, in the hockey world, knew about. So that's what surprised me after the fact, was hearing from all these people and having them say, oh my God, this has been going on for so long. I'm so glad that somebody finally was able to tell this story, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that made me feel better, because, in all my years as a journalist, it's one thing to break a story. It's another thing to be an advocate, right, in a certain way, do some kind of advocacy journalism. And like I only had an opportunity to do that a handful of times in my career, and so it's nice to be able to sit there and say, hey, listen, there were a lot of people who were affected by this, and here's the real story so that you know, as opposed to just what's being kind of presented to you by everyone else. So that kind of made me feel good as a journalist of doing the job that I did and doing it well.
Well, you did an excellent job, and
Thank you.
the praise was well worth it and well deserved. I want to go through a couple of these things that you mentioned in your piece,
Yep.
just for the sake of, I don't know, catching a couple of people up if they didn't see it, but that post on the site went absolutely wild. So in the immediate aftermath, I think people had expected that guys like Ian LaPerriere, who had been overseeing a penalty kill unit that found itself last in the NHL by a pretty substantial margin, should have likely lost his job. But Gord Murphy, who not many people had talked about, was fired almost on the spot, and as was assistant general manager Chris Pryor, which you explained the reasoning behind in your piece, but go ahead and do it now.
Well, so I think there's two different things here. I think that the Gord Murphy firing was he was a problem, and he was a problem for a lot of reasons. Mainly because he was a Hextall spy, in the sense that he reported everything to Hextall about the locker room, the coaches' meetings, and things like that. Like, he was like a little mole, which, I know some people say, well, it's good that a coach reports back to the general manager. Yeah, but he's an assistant coach. It should be the head coach that's reporting to the general manager. And the general manager should not be undermining the head coach by going to the assistant coach and saying, now you tell me what's really happening. Okay, that's not a healthy relationship. Okay, so no matter how you slice it, that in and of itself is a major problem. But Murphy did not have any fans among the Flyers defensemen. And I will take you back. This here's something that's kind of new that I wasn't in the story that I wrote, but I'll kind of give you a little feel for just how much they disliked him. If you recall, I'm not sure if it was the end of last season. It might have been the season before. I think it was the end of the 16-17 season. On breakup day, after the season was over, there was an interview with Shane Gostisbehere with the media. He was doing his scrum, and people asked him about his season. It wasn't as good as obviously his rookie season was when he had the big breakout, and everybody thought, oh my God, this kid's going to be a superstar. And then his second season was not nearly as good. And so he was recapping it and talking to the media. And this isn't an exact quote, but I'm just paraphrasing here. But he said something along the lines of, going forward, I'm just going to play my game. It doesn't matter, if I'm going to get yelled at about it or not. And I think a lot of people assumed when he said that, or whatever exactly it was that he said, it was something very similar, that he was referencing Dave Hextall.
Yeah, because that was the season that he had gotten benched. And
right,
sent him to the press box and everything.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And so everybody just assumed that he was mad at Hextall when he said that, right? Mm-hmm. Turns out it was Gord Murphy. Like, Murphy was on him constantly to play a different way than he wanted to play. And then, obviously, last season, you saw a kind of a renaissance, a little bit, of Shane Gostisbehere. He started to play a little bit more like he played that rookie season. Didn't quite make it all the way back to that success level as his first year, but had a really nice year, was scoring more, was more involved with the offense, et cetera, et cetera. And then this season, it got worse, and he's been not good this year. And I think that that's because now I think Murphy went to Hextall, and Hextall was on top of Gostisbehere about it, as opposed to just Murphy being on top of Gostisbehere about it. So, I think there's an example of why, Gord Murphy had to go. I mean, when you're spying on your own team for the general manager, even on your own head coach for the general manager, and you have a bad relationship with the players that you are supposed to be coaching and making better, there's really no reason for you to stay in your job. As for Chris Pryor, I think that he was more of a unfortunate collateral in this, like kind of collateral damage. Chris Pryor had a 20-year history with the Flyers. He'd been really a good soldier through his entire career with the team, starting back when I believe he was just a scout when he first came in, and then worked his way all the way up to being the assistant general manager, and he was in charge of scouting activities. Was also director of player personnel. So he's a guy who really kind of worked his way up to the position that he had. He was the one guy that I think that Hextall trusted. So Hextall had this really tight, small circle of people that he would communicate with. Paul Holmgren was not one. Dave Scott was not one, even though they were his bosses. Bob Clark, who was a senior vice president, was not really one. So Ron really just kind of confided in Chris Pryor. And I think because of that, and because Chris kind of, was loyal to the general manager, as I guess any assistant GM should be, he kind of had to go too. And that's a shame. So unfortunately, that's kind of how that worked out. And so the Flyers will ultimately replace Chris Pryor. I think Chuck Fletcher will bring a guy in probably after the season, kind of let the season play out, and then bring in an assistant GM at that point. But I think that's why those two guys had to go, and obviously they were for varying reasons, but there was a real reason that they had to be forced out.
It is a shame that Pryor's gone because he was, part of an organization that did a great job of drafting, and it wasn't like they were just great at drafting first-round picks. If you look back at that track record, the better part of the last, 2-3 seasons, especially, the drafts have been strong, and even in the post-analysis, most of the national media, I think, has ultimately raved about the value picks that the Flyers have made. And when you look at this stacked, youth system, it's something that, Ron Hextall has gotten a lot of credit for, and rightfully so, in rebuilding a farm system that was, quite frankly, depleted after his predecessor had made some win-now kind of moves. So it is a shame to see Pryor go. But now that there's an assistant GM position open, there were two names that I think fans had kind of figured could potentially have been in play for the GM role, although the more you and I kind of went back and forth about it, it didn't really seem to make sense at this point. But assistant GM, let me float two names out to you. Former Flyers, which I know might make some people cringe, but let's be honest, the likelihood of somebody from inside the organization at some point being brought in a prominent role is, I would think, is pretty high. Two guys that have some experience in front offices, that of course would be Chris Pronger and Danny Briere. Do you think there's a likelihood or a possibility that the Flyers going into next season or at the end of this season explore the possibility of Chris Pronger or Danny Briere being down at at the side of Chuck Fletcher as this thing moves forward?
Ultimately, that's going to be Chuck's decision. I think there's a possibility. I wouldn't put it as a high possibility. I know Chris Pronger wants to be a GM in the NHL eventually, and so it probably would make sense for him to get an assistant role somewhere first. And I do know that there was some internal conversation about should they reach out to him and talk to him, etc. I have a feeling that that's not necessarily the direction that the Flyers want to go here. I do think that there's more of a likelihood that Danny would be the guy, although I still don't think that's a real I think he's got a better chance than Pronger, but I still don't think it's a better than 50% chance. And that's because they're grooming him for that role. I mean, he's running the ECHL affiliate in Maine, and he's been around a lot more recently, so he's obviously been kind of involved in some conversations. I know Paul Holmgren thinks very highly of him. I'm sure Dave Scott likes him. They wouldn't have given him the chance to run their affiliate in Maine if they didn't like him. So I think he's kind of like getting his feet wet in what it takes to manage a team. So I think that there's a possibility there, although I still think that one might be a little bit down the road, more so than next season. If anything else, if I had to guess where he goes with this, I think Chuck Fletcher will probably try and bring somebody from outside the organization in to be an assistant GM. Just like if they decide to make a coaching change at some point, I think that there's a possibility that that he would bring in a coach that he's familiar with more so than somebody that we would anticipate coming in. So, and I think we'll kind of answer those questions. We have some Twitter questions that are coming from fans for tonight, and I think that we can address those when we get to those questions.
Speaking of bringing somebody in from outside the organization, another piece of news that Anthony SanFilippo broke was the fact that the Flyers brought in, or I guess I should say Comcast Spectacor brought in somebody from outside of the organization. That's Valerie Camillo, who came to the crew here from the Washington Nationals. To be the new president of business operations for the Flyers and Wells Fargo Center. That was a scoop that you had, and I don't know how long you were sitting on this one, but you made the breaking news go out. I believe about an hour before Comcast Spectacor reported it. So I don't know when you were first tipped off to that, but is it a shakeup, or is this just putting a new figurehead in?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure that we have the honest answer just yet. So I had first found out about this hire on Thursday when we were down at the game against Columbus, the last home game before the road trip. And the way it was presented to me that night was that this person was coming in to basically take over the roles that Sean Tilger had as the chief operating officer for the Flyers. And so that was the initial story that I was given. And I had actually begun writing it that night as soon as we got home from the game. And my plan was to put it out on Friday that, the Flyers or Comcast Spectacor is hiring this woman from the Washington Nationals to come in and kind of basically take over Sean's role. And I was going to be a little bit critical, to be honest with you, because my impression was that that Dave Scott was not happy with the work that Sean had been doing in that role. But on Friday, I had the opportunity to speak with a couple of people who were probably a little bit more involved in this. And a little bit more knowledgeable than the folks that originally told me about the hire. And after talking to them on Friday, I decided to wait. And I said, I'm going to try and this, because this seems like a more rational explanation for why this hire is happening. And so I decided to wait to put the story out. And I was going to try and get a hold of Dave Scott, who is now the chairman and CEO of Comcast Spectacor. Try and get a hold of him over the weekend. Efforts on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday went by the wayside. Was not able to get a hold of him. And so then come Monday morning, I decided to run the story knowing that they were going to make the announcement at some time on Monday. I wasn't sure exactly what time, but I knew they were going to make the announcement sometime on Monday. I wanted to get it out right away, just when, opening of business, which is usually 9 o'clock for the website, and get it out then. And I was telling the story from the angle of the people who I had spoken to on Friday, which made a lot more sense that this was more of the role that Peter Luukko used to have as far as being the president of the Flyers, but from a business perspective. So Luukko, when Luukko was president, he was president of both the business side and the hockey operations side. Now, when we've had Paul Holmgren as president of the hockey operations side for the past 4+ years, but we've never had a replacement for the business side that Luukko had after Luukko resigned in 2013. So that kind of has been left out there since then. So Valerie Camillo is going to come in and kind of take that role. So it's almost like it went back to the structure that was in place in 2013, except that the role of the president of the team has been split into two, one that takes care of the hockey operations side, which is Paul Holmgren, and one that takes care of the business side, which is now Valerie Camillo. Sean Tilger maintains his job as the chief operating officer of the Flyers, still doing all the things that he does, except now he reports, instead of reporting directly to Dave Scott, he reports to Valerie Camillo now. It does seem a little awkward that the chief operating officer of the team now has to report to another manager that's not the chairman. You know what I'm saying? So that does seem a little bit weird, but from what I'm told, this is no different than the way it used to be. And so I kind of, I believe the people who I talk to. And then we'll, for now, I think that that's probably the way it's going to be. I will be interested, though, to see where things are once the season ends, because I think that the possibility does exist. I have to admit, knowing how Comcast operates, I guess the possibility does exist that change could happen in the offseason, and that's usually when they make their changes, is once the season ends. So we'll obviously have the binoculars on the front office on the business side come, April, May, whenever the season officially comes to a close. But I think until that point, everybody's going to be in the role that they're in without any more changes.
You mentioned Sean Tilger, which leads me to the third and final story that you broke since the last time we did Snow the Goalie podcast, and that, of course, is the much-anticipated story about Flyers attendance. It's something that you and I have focused in on a lot, especially during the Press Row show. Every single game, we're kind of, looking pretty cross at what we're seeing out there. A lot of groups and rows and sections of empty seats, which certainly does not help the home ice advantage that used to make playing in Philadelphia such an advantage for the orange and black. Have at it.
Well, I mean, we could probably have a discussion about this, Russ, because I think this is an old school mentality versus a new school mentality of fans and how they are. I can tell you when I was younger, going to a game, you had an opportunity to get tickets. If you wanted to go, you got the tickets. Like, you didn't wait. Like, you didn't sit there and say, oh, I wonder if this price will go down, or oh, I know there's hundreds of other seats available, so I don't need to buy these tickets now. I can wait till last minute, and blah blah blah. Like, there's all kinds of differences now, which, I mean, some, as a fan, you can look at it as a positive, because you say, oh, I can get tickets for $15-$20 now, as opposed to paying $85-$90, which is face value. But the negative ends up being twofold. One, if you're a season ticket holder and you can't go to the game, trying to resell your tickets and get any kind of value for the tickets that you have is awful. Like, you're not going to get anything, because there are people who are selling tickets for pennies on the dollar. So that's a negative to being a season ticket holder. And the other negative is, these tickets are already that are up for sale on the secondary market are already purchased. So they're there. Like, people have already paid for them. The Flyers have already gotten their money for them. So what ends up happening is, if you can't resell them, and whether it's a ticket agency, a broker, or whether it's a season ticket holder, or whether it's just a average fan who happens to have a couple seats and doesn't want to go, and they want to try and sell them on the secondary market, if they don't get purchased, they don't get purchased. It doesn't, the ticket is sold, the Flyers got their money, but now you have something called the drop count. The drop count is the number of tickets that are dropped, that are out, that don't get used. That's what the drop count is, and it ends up being a percentage. And the percentage has been going up over the course of the last few years. And that's just, again, a generational thing. And it's interesting. Sean and I we talked at the end of November about this, and we had a very candid conversation. And Sean's roughly my age. I think he's got me by a couple years, but we talked about saying how today's generation of fan comes late, leaves early. They're not as, there's more pulling on their pocket for entertainment dollars. And obviously it used to be that, you had to watch the game on Prism, for example, right? I mean, they had 90s night and they did the Prism Open.
What a beautiful night that was. 90s night was I had all the feels. Right? I had all the feels. It was amazing. It was so well done.
Yeah, it was. It was really well done. But so anyway, like, you had to have Prism to watch the game, and if you didn't have Prism, like, you couldn't go to the bar and watch it, because if they didn't have Prism, it's not like there was no satellite, there was no streaming video, you weren't able to watch it on your phone or anything like that. I mean, so the options were limited. So you went to the game and you got down there and you didn't miss it. You were there on time, and you didn't leave till the last the horn sounded, and that place was packed. And when it was at the Spectrum, it was 17,009 or whatever the attendance was. And then Wells Fargo was built, and they would easily average 19.6, 19.7 a game, and that place was full. But as
where did people
things changed.
Where did people park their horse and buggies at that time? Did they light the inside of the arena with candles? I'm genuinely curious.
Nice. But over time, this is kind of what's happened. And so now you have these drop counts that are, on average, probably around 12, 13%. So you end up getting, you end up selling, 19,500 tickets, but about 2,200 of them don't show up because of the secondary market, and the tickets aren't selling on secondary market. One of the things that the Flyers realized that they were doing that was a mistake. First thing is, as Sean said, hey, we needed to pull some tickets back because we can't have. It hurts our season ticket holders to have all these seats that are out there that people can get for $20, and they can't get their money back that they paid for their seats. Which I have a. I don't know. I look at it two ways. One, I get it. Like, you can't go to every game, right? You can't make every game. So what do you want to do? You want to find somebody to buy your tickets. Okay, put them up online. Hopefully somebody will buy them, and you want to get a little bit of your money back. But at the same time, don't buy season tickets if the whole goal is to make money off it, because you're not going to. I mean, that's the mistake. And so to sit there and complain about that, if you're a season ticket holder, I don't have any sympathy for you. Look, if you want to be a season ticket holder, there's 41 home games. You have to be willing to go to 30 to 35.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, if you're a season ticket holder, that you have to be willing to have you or somebody in your family or friends go to 30, 35. If you need to sell somewhere between 7 and 10 games, okay, I get it. All right, fine. You can't go to every game, and you want to sell 7 to 10. That's fine. But there are people out there who buy season tickets, go to like a handful of games, and try to sell the other 35. Well, I mean, what the hell are you doing that for? That doesn't make any sense. So I don't have.
Only if you're gonna go to the games that you're not gonna get any value for. Like if you're playing Florida, but then you decide to sell whenever like Vegas comes in or
Pittsburgh.
Or
yeah,
and you'd obviously make some money back on that.
Right. But that's so. You shouldn't look at it as.
But then you're also missing being at the best games. So
right. So you shouldn't be a season.
Then it really is a curious play.
Right. You shouldn't be a season ticket holder as a business proposal. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So I get it. So the Flyers, Tilger said they pulled back 500 tickets that they were making available to brokers because they wanted to, improve the odds of season ticket holders getting, more money for their tickets, and it makes perfect sense. By doing that, they also knew that they were going to, have a slightly negative impact on their attendance because they know how many tickets they sell for games. So having an extra 500 seats now suddenly available for them to give out is now going to be, it's now going to hurt that ticket number. And then secondly, the other mistake that they were making is when they were selling tickets to brokers, they were selling them in clumps of seats in the same sections. So we were at the playoff game last year, or a couple playoff games against Pittsburgh last year, and you're looking around the stadium, and there are giant sections, even in the lower bowl, of like 6 or 7 rows of empty seats in the same section. And you're like, this is a damn playoff game against the Penguins. How can these seats not be full? How can you not, not show up, A, or B, not be able to sell tickets to this game? Like, it kind of floored me. And in conversation with Tilger at the time, and then I reiterated it again with him when we met in November, was that, that they realized it was a mistake to sell them in bulk like that to brokers. And so what they've done now, even though they've pulled back 500, but even the ones that they're selling to brokers, they're now not selling that many seats together. They're selling, a row here, a row there kind of thing, so that it doesn't look as bad if people don't show up. So that's some of the stuff there. And it turns out that the Flyers drop count overall up till that point, which was the end of November, was down 2% from last year. However, one game, if you remember, the Islanders game was during that surprise snowstorm, and their drop count that game was really bad. So it was like they were only at 62% capacity for that game because of the weather. So if you take that game out, they're about on par with where they were last year. So there's really it's not like this season their fans are more apathetic than they were last season. It's kind of identical. But if you look back over the course of the past several seasons, there is a significant drop, and so the question now becomes, is that because the team's simply mediocre? Or is that because of the secondary market? Or is it a combination of both? And it's probably a combination of both.
Yeah, I think so. It's definitely got to be some of the apathy. One of the comments that we got here was from Patrick at Path525 on Twitter, who said, I love the Flyers, but they're unwatchable. And it's gotten to the point where I just want them to stop and go away for a year so I can focus on the Eagles, 76ers, Phillies. Just stop. That is a sentiment that we've been hearing more and more of.
Yeah, and it's I got a lot of comments on the story, and both on Crossing Broad on the Facebook page, and then also people tweeting at me. Season ticket holders who are saying they're just fed up because there are fans who can get into the game for so cheap, and they can't sell their tickets. And I get it. I feel for them if, in fact, they're only trying to sell that one game or just a handful of games. But I don't feel bad for you if you're trying to sell, if you're a season ticket holder and you're just holding on to season tickets until the team is good, and you're trying to sell games and think you're going to get money back, because you're just not. You got to be realistic and rational about it. Anyway, long story short. I think that there is a little bit of apathy, and I think that it's obvious, but it's over the course of a long period of time. It's not something that's just happening now, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Like I've been saying, 16,000 strong down at Wells Fargo Center. All right, so let's move off that. So there have been a few things that have happened. Of course, since the last time we recorded, there have been multiple games. Most notably, I would say, the Flyers went to Pittsburgh and pulled off. It's not like the Penguins have had a great season at this point by any stretch. They've been kind of struggling for a lot of the season, only a spot ahead of the Flyers, I think, even going into that game. And the Flyers kind of stunned Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh. They won 4-2. That was a night that you and I, along with the rest of the team from the site, were out having a lovely steak dinner. Which took pretty much everything in my power to try to get you to go to that, and that was a good night. Nobody could seem to believe that the Flyers had actually pulled that one off, and then they followed it up 5 days later with a loss to the Blue Jackets. They of course rebounded with a 4-goal effort, a 4-goal win over the Buffalo Sabres. Got a little bit of revenge for earlier in the season. And then the next night, literally the next day, after they won 6-2 in Buffalo, they drop a game to Winnipeg 7-1, where they were just, quite frankly, outplayed. And Michael Neuvirth, Michael Neuvirth, thanks for playing, I guess. If you're in the camp of tanking the season, by all means, put Michael Neuvirth out there for the next 5 games until he inevitably gets injured. But that, by my count, that was the 4th game that the team has lost by 5 goals or more, or 4 goals or more. I think it was 4 goals or more. Might have been 5. They're getting blown out in nearly 1 out of every 6 games they play this season, give or take, and getting blown out by considerable margins. I mean, there have been plenty of questions going on about, is this a Dave Hextall thing? Mike Cassetto on Twitter says, do you see Hextall lasting all the way to the season ticket holders town hall meeting in the spring? There were other questions that we got, I believe, about the fact that, this team's gotten blown out. He also brought up, do you attribute the frequent blowouts, even dating back to last season, to poor leadership from veteran players and coaching staff? If so, what changes would you make? To me, there's something rotten within that locker room, and I can't totally put my finger on what it is. You've been down there for longer than I have. I like to think that if there's one thing I'm pretty decent at, it's reading a room. And at no point in this season have I felt like going into that locker room after a home game that there is a real unity among the players. I wrote about this a while back, and some people thought that I was just throwing crap against the wall to see if it sticks. but it's something I genuinely think. I think that there are divisions within that locker room, and I don't think that's unnatural or there's something that's unique about this situation. But I don't think it's the most cohesive locker room, and I think you could see that in the way they play on the ice. And this team, we've talked so many times about the fact that they're not the strongest in terms of their mental state when things go wrong. This team really, to me, you feel their youth when they fall behind. And have there been a few games in recent weeks where the team has been able to fight their way back after falling down early? Yeah, like there have been a couple, but for the most part, and I think you can even pass this over not just this season but the previous season, maybe even 2 seasons ago, this team falls behind early, especially at home. You can pretty much write the game off. I mean, again, there have been a couple exceptions to this, but for the most part, something goes sideways, and it doesn't feel like this team believes in themselves or one another or their ability to really claw their way back into a game. And whether that's the coach, the coaching staff, if that's the players, if that's the veteran core, I just don't see it. I don't think what you're looking at here, and this isn't to go with like the old school, everything needs to be rah, 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 and, smash your head through a cinder block wall to get the team going, but I just don't think there's a fire there. And if it is a fire, it's like this introverted fire that, quite frankly, isn't going to motivate the masses. And I think, to some extent, like we see that in that locker room, there are a few guys who are demonstrative after games. Like Radko Gudas is a guy who comes to mind. When the team loses, he's pissed. I mean, he's as pissed as anybody in that locker room, right? There was a game that we went in. It was right after the Flyers had, I think it was it the overtime game where Konechny and Wheel sat at their lockers for a solid 10 minutes into the media availability. Neither of them to that point had even been called up, and they were just sitting there just brewing in it. And like I feel like the way that some of the younger guys and what looks like the next core, the way that they react as a whole to losses versus what the veterans are doing at this point, I think if fans could really see what's going on in that locker room, I think they would see some of this division. I'm not saying the team doesn't like each other. I just think they react to things differently, and I don't think there's anybody who really bridges that gap well enough to communicate effectively, especially to the younger players when things are going wrong. I don't know what your read on it is.
My read is that this is a broken team, and I don't think that there's anything that the coaching staff can do to fix it quickly.
The term I used was fractured.
Yeah, it is. And so let's put it this way. So you have a very young defensive core that has been dealing with a toxic environment for the past 2 seasons. I mean, obviously, there's a couple of them have been here longer than that, but for the most part, the past 2 seasons. And they now have to figure out how to fix that. And they're being now coached by a guy who is more of a nurturing defensive coach in Rick Wilson, who's had a history. He's like people say he's a defense whisperer, and has a way of getting these guys to recognize their potential. But when you have such a long-standing problem that has been going on, it's not something that's going to be easily fixed overnight. So what Chuck Fletcher has to identify here as the GM, and he's only been on the job for 8 days, right? So it's not something that's going to just happen overnight. What he has to identify is these guys who have been playing terrible, your Ivan Provorovs, your Shane Gostisbeheres, your these guys, will they fix it? Are they fixable? My thought process is yes. I kind of think they are. But I also don't think it's going to be something that you're going to see this season. I think this is something that probably really doesn't show itself until next year. That said, you got to look at what else is on this roster and say, what can the Flyers do with the rest of this roster? Wayne Simmons is a free agent next year. I think he's obviously going to go. What does he get you? Probably not a lot, but he'll get you something. I mean, but it'll get you some value, but not a ton of value. I think Michael Raffl will be traded. He's another guy that's got value, and I think that the Flyers can probably get a little something for him. Then you have to start making bigger decisions. You have to look at a guy like Voracek and say, can we make something work in a trade with him? You have to look at a guy like Gostisbehere and say, are his limitations, defensive limitations, too much to maintain having an offensive-minded specialist defenseman on your team?
Can I stop you there for a second, though? Ghost,
yeah, go ahead.
I feel like one of the
it's a tough thing to say.
One of the concerning things about Ghost has just been like, yeah, okay, he's an offensive-minded defenseman, but he also seems to be a guy who right now is just hesitant to put the puck on net.
Yeah, he doesn't know what
he's out of sorts.
He is out of sorts,
and this I think kind of speaks to what we're seeing in that locker room. Whether it's after a loss or after the rare home win, like a lot of these guys just seem to be lost without a paddle. Like maybe Rick Wilson comes in and he is the defense whisperer. Like, I don't know, but somebody like I feel like the team almost needs a sports psychologist more than they need a new coach.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that.
You might be right
to be taken
you might be
the
right.
wrong way, but on the Sixers side of things, everybody talks about Markelle Fultz is in his own head. You got to remember that Fultz is the same age as some of these guys on this team.
Yeah.
And just because, hockey is perceived as, a tougher sport doesn't necessarily mean that some of these guys don't get in their own heads. And like, I think Ghost has the ability to be that ridiculously dynamic and I don't know, like progressive defenseman, like kind of the idea of what the game is becoming. But if he's not going to put the puck on the net and he's going to be, one of the biggest, like the most egregious overpassers, then like I don't know. Like he's not contributing as much defensively as you would want out of a top pair defenseman, right? But that's part of why he and Provorov up until this year had played so well together. Provorov could make up for some of his defensive deficiencies, and because he was so dynamic offensively, and because he had the ability to score a few goals, it worked, but it's not working this year. And I think, that's part of why that pairing hasn't really worked at all, and why Dave Hextall got away from using it. And he's tried in recent games to try to put it back together and see if they could rekindle some of that magic. But, Ghost being in his own head isn't helping the team. It's certainly not helping him. It's not that he looks like a shell of the player that we've all kind of grown accustomed to seeing, but there's just no confidence there. And it's funny because when Dale Weiss was the one who scored on his first breakaway goal to tie a game this year, I think it was Ghost who was the one who said that Weiss had been in a pretty dark place and he wasn't totally sure if he was going to be in the lineup at all for the rest of the season, and it was good to see him work his way back. And it was interesting that it was Ghost saying that, because in a sense you could almost think that Ghost was kind of projecting himself on Weiss in that situation.
Yeah, this is a tough guy to talk about because we all want to see him do well. I mean, he's a good player. I always compared him, even from day one when he was a rookie, to Mike Green, and I think that I might have even been a little bit. That might have been a little bit wrong. He has that Mike Green in him. Obviously he's an offensive-minded guy. He's going to put up a ton of points, but Mike Green always seemed to make the defensive mistakes for the Capitals, and they didn't get to be a better defensive team until they got rid of Mike Green. And it took a few years, obviously, after he left before they won a Stanley Cup, but nevertheless, Mike Green never became anything more. He was at his best as an offensive-minded defenseman who was not a good defensive defenseman playing with the Capitals, and then he went elsewhere and never really became much of anything. And I think Ghost is probably better than that, but I think it's comparable in the sense that he may never be better than he is defensively. I mean, this just might be what he is defensively. I certainly think he can get back to being a more dominant offensive player, but he really just seems to be lacking confidence offensively right now, and that's why you hope that it all gets better for him with Rick Wilson. But I'm not sure. I'm just not sure. I think that's a big question mark at this point. And another guy to me that's a big question mark at this point, Russ, is Nolan Patrick.
Yeah.
There's a lot that I'm not liking about him, and there's even some things that I've been hearing that I haven't reported yet, just about his attitude and the way he approaches things. And I'm a little concerned. He's 20. Right, he's young. It could change.
He's Markel Fultz.
It can change in a heartbeat. Look. I mean, I'll give you an example. Look at a guy like Scott Lawton. Right, Lawton was a first-round pick who was expected to be a lot better than he is, and really struggled the first few years that he was, in the organization. And then he realized, you know what? Maybe I'm never going to be that top-end scoring talent. Maybe my role is better as a third-line center or depth forward kind of thing. And really started to embrace that role. And once he embraced it, he became a much better player. Now, I'm not trying to compare Nolan Patrick to Scott Lawton. I think Nolan Patrick's got more talent, obviously, than Scott Lawton. Should be a better offensive player. But he's really just not – he's not getting it. He's not getting it right now. And I'm worried that that's something that's negatively being affected by the fracture of this team right now. So
was it a mistake
to
anoint him as the second coming and guarantee him a roster spot last year?
Yeah. I mean, I think. Look,
he looks like a guy that needed seasoning and didn't get it. It looked almost like it was a desperation move that they were worried about the public perception and thought, you know what, we're not going out at this point. Like, I don't know if this was a Hextall thing, but like, we're not going out. We're not throwing huge money at free agents. We're still building at this point. Why not let the kid go out there and learn? But he just doesn't look like an NHL center right now. Like, he certainly doesn't look like a 2C. And like, I know that I had joked around a while back about like, oh, why don't you just make him the top line center and just see see how it works with Giroux? Like, maybe you end up unlocking his potential, but like, yeah, he's 20, and like maybe for as often as we've said that Carter Hart doesn't belong anywhere near the NHL roster, and it's not entirely fair to compare a center and a goaltender, they're about the same age. So like, for those who say, well, Carter Hart's too young, well, I mean, was it fair to throw Nolan Patrick into this kind of position where like he's playing as a 2C, and quite frankly, we talked about this on the Press Row show, but like, he's been on a line with JVR and Wayne Simmons, neither of whom are fleet of foot. It doesn't put Patrick in the most successful place, right? Like, I don't think he's being bailed out by the coaching staff, at least in that respect. And yeah, like the very few times that he's been available to us as the media, and this is like maybe the thing that I've learned in that transition of just being a fan to being down there and covering the team. If media are ever critical of a player showing up or not, or what they say to the media, it's not necessarily that the media is just whining because they're not getting quotes. Like, I could care less. We could write stuff up without quotes. There are some people who I'm not so sure that are on the beat could do anything if they didn't have a ton of quotes, even though the team provides those quite often after the fact. Nolan Patrick doesn't say anything. And so it's almost not worth having him in the locker room in a post-game scrum, because he's just been coached not to say anything. And again, like, this could just be a 19, now 20-year-old kid trying to find his way in the league, a guy who had been told probably his entire life that he was going to be the number one overall pick in a draft, and a guy who, quite frankly, people, it's not that they made excuses, but they were tempering their expectations a bit because he was so young, and not everybody expected him to make the team out of camp. But we're in year 2, and it doesn't really look like a lot of progress has been made. And maybe the most damning part of this is it was the first offseason he's had that he's been healthy. So you would expect that there should be some kind of, a bump in production. You would think that, points-wise, he would get himself somewhere on the stat sheet, and it's just not happening. It's fine if you're not scoring goals, but if you're creating for your line mates, you're getting involved in the play, and ultimately you're getting those guys set up. And I know plus minus is an imperfect stat, but like he just hasn't been part of a lot of scoring plays.
No, he's on pace to be the same thing he was last year. I mean, he scored 30 points in 73 games last year. He's got 10 points in 25 games last year, which is a pace for 31. So, I mean, you've got to be better than 30, 31 points a season, even at this stage. Especially if you're playing on the second line. I mean, he's been playing with good NHL players. He's been playing with Jake Voracek and Wayne Simmons and James Van Riemsdyk. I mean, he's playing with good players, so he needs to be better. And I know you can't do anything about. I mean, obviously Nico Hischier went ahead of him. Hischier's got more points so far than Patrick in their career, 71 points in 107 games, as opposed to Patrick with 40 and 98. And so Hischier's numbers aren't off the charts either, and he was the number one overall pick. But I make a comparison. If you look at the next center who went at pick 5, Dallas took Heiskanen at number 3, and then Colorado took Cale Makar at number 4. Those were 2 defensemen. Vancouver took Elias Pettersson, who was the next center that was taken, or next forward that was taken at number 5. They didn't put him in the league right away. They let him play another season overseas. And now he's come in this year as a rookie, and he's got 30 points in 26 games because he got that extra season playing in junior hockey. Actually, well, he was playing in the Swedish league, so that wasn't really junior hockey. But still, nevertheless, he got to play another season not in the NHL, and I think Nolan Patrick would have benefited far more from that. That said, you can't, that's hindsight. That's hindsight's 2020. He's here, and you got to do something with him. He's got to get better, and continuing to trot him out there as your second line center, and he's only putting up 5 goals and 5 assists as a second line center is through 25 games is not good. It's just not good.
Yeah, I mean, is like, it's not even a question at this point, but it's like, he's got to be moved down. Is stagnation regression? And I would say, yeah. Like, it has to be, right? Like, you expect a step. Like I said, it's not like he was carrying another knock in the offseason. Like, he actually had the time to work on his game the entire offseason and not have to worry about a surgery, right? And it's deeply troubling. And the fact that he hasn't been moved out of that spot, I think, is even more concerning. Now, granted, there's an injury to Sean Couturier. We saw Giroux return to being the top-line center, but, like, is it more likely that Dave Hextall moves Nolan Patrick down to the 3C, or could we, in a very limited stretch here, see him try to jumpstart his young center, the guy who, in theory, should be carrying the mantle for the next core, in Nolan Patrick? Like, does he consider moving him up to the top-line center and playing with Giroux and Konechny and just seeing if it works? Or if it at least jumpstarts him and then bring Coots back as the 2C? Like, is there any possibility of it? I don't see it, but, like, I wouldn't be adverse to seeing it happen.
I don't necessarily think it happens either, but I think that maybe, there was a lot of talk with Chuck Fletcher about like what he feels like he needs to go out and get. He mentioned, making the defense better. He mentioned getting a goalie. He mentioned getting another center. And I think everybody just assumed, well, they're going to go out and he's going to try and find a number 3 center. What if he goes out and finds a number 2 center and you put Patrick on that third line? I think you get him against weaker opposition. You could probably still put one of those veteran forwards down there with him, and try and jumpstart him against weaker lines on the other side, and maybe it gets him rolling that way. He's had little stretches, like if you remember at the end of last season, after Wayne Simmons got hurt, he looked really good, playing on the second line, playing on the top power play unit. Really started to have some jump in his game. I really liked the way he was playing then. But this season, he's had a game here and there where you're like, okay, yeah, that's now just got to build off that. And then it just goes right back to him being invisible. And I wonder if it's more on the player and less on what they're trying to make him do. I don't know. I mean, I think we still need a little bit more time, but I definitely think it's a cause for concern.
I think you're totally right, and I'm nervous, and I'm hoping that he's able to rebound, because ultimately, as we look at this fractured locker room, Jesus, we've gone really negative. As we look at this locker room, like, Nolan Patrick has to be one of the guys that leads this team after this core is either dismantled by Chuck Fletcher or just attrition works its way through, and we're a couple of years down the line, and the core of this team has to pass the mantle to the next group. You've got to hope that Nolan Patrick's one of the guys who rises to the occasion, but to this point, there's been nothing to show that he's going to. Oh boy.
Yep.
Is there anything else that we should talk about with that locker room? Somebody did ask the question on Twitter. Where was it at? Eric Hoflick said on Twitter, in the wake of multiple front office and assistant coaching firings, what has been the general morale in the locker room? Are the players at all affected by the organizational flux or turmoil? Yeah, they've been affected. They've looked shell shocked at times. The immediate aftermath of Hextall being fired, they looked shell shocked. After Pryor and Murphy were fired, they looked even more shell shocked. It's like I said, it's not a team that right now feels like it has a lot of mental fortitude. I'm sure there are certain guys on the roster who are tough, physically and mentally, and are able to kind of get over this, and they know that it's a business, yada, yada, yada. There are just other guys who look just kind of overwhelmed by the moment. And then there are some that just look glassed over. And I don't know how to feel about that crew. I do kind of come back around to the idea, and this is something I think I said in the offseason, it might have been in the very beginning of the season, but I am questioning whether the next core, like I think that Couturier and Gostisbehere, I would say, are kind of like the guys who bridge the gap between the older vets, which would include like Giroux and Voracek, and the younger guys like Konechny and Patrick. I really do wonder if the youngest of the group, if that younger group like the Konechnys and the Nolan Patricks, I wonder if they've now tuned out this leadership core, and this kind of comes back to the question of, this team's gotten blown out so often, and how does it happen, and why does it happen? I don't know if it's that the young players don't respect the coach, and by extension they don't respect this leadership core because they effectively have to act as the liaison for the coaching staff. But I've never really gotten the feeling, watching them on the bench or hearing things that they're saying in the locker room, that makes me think that this young group really believes in the leadership core that's in place right now. And I don't know if you need to go out and get like the most macho of macho men to really grab this team by the horns, but at this point, like I just don't see anything that makes me think that they're going to turn this thing around. I think there's a possibility, and a few of the players have said it throughout the season, that hockey's a funny game. You get one lucky bounce here or there, you start putting some pucks in the back of the net, and all of a sudden, you're riding a huge momentum wave. That part's possible, but I don't necessarily think that this team has the ability to go out on the ice and put together, a sustained drive of success, 6 or 7 games unbeaten in regulation. Like, I don't know if this team has it. I think they need to make a move. And while people have been clamoring for Chuck Fletcher to blow this whole thing up, or to go out and, fire the coach, or, trade a core member of the team, or go out and make a couple big deals, like, you also have to, at the same time, realize that Chuck Fletcher has to do his due diligence in evaluating every player now that he is the GM and he gets to see how things work day in and day out. Now that he has the ability to do that with the coaching staff, like, I just think it's a hard spot to be in, because in a sense you're in purgatory, because you know what this team is. We've seen what the team is to this point. But at the same time, I think rational people have to give the GM time to evaluate and make moves that are going to be the best for the team in, the short term, this season, even next season, and going forward, further down the line. And I think it's a hard thing to balance, and I think it's a hard sell to the fan base. But this is kind of where we're at, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This is where we're at. It's kind of a difficult spot for this team right now. They have the 5th worst record in the league. They're next to last in the conference. They're 7 points out of a playoff spot right now. I mean, these are not things that bode well for this time of year. And if Chuck Fletcher is going to make moves, he's going to start really. You don't just make a move in a day. Like, you don't just start saying, okay, I'm selling, here we go, and then make it happen, right? So it's probably something that conversations start happening in, usually mid-January, and with the trade deadline at the end of February. And, sometimes deals get done in a couple weeks. Sometimes it takes the full 6 weeks to make a deal, and sometimes the deal doesn't get done. But my point is that they don't have much time left to kind of suggest that they can get back into this. I mean, they really have a month, to really kind of show that they can, get back into contention. And this is going to be tough, man. I mean, Saturday was a nice win. Sunday was a disaster against Winnipeg. Calgary is no joke. Calgary is playing some really good hockey. That's going to be a tough game. Edmonton's been playing much better since Ken Hitchcock took over as coach. That's going to be a tough game. Even Vancouver, who's not as good as any of these other teams that they've played on this road trip, has been playing decent hockey, and that's going to be a tough game. So the Flyers really, when you look at what's coming up for them, this is not an easy path to turning this around. Can they do it? Sure. I mean, they can. I mean, we've seen it before. Just when you think that this team is done and this team is, on the verge of an utter collapse, they find a way to win 3, 4, 5 games in a row, and then all of a sudden everything's okay again. But even when they come home next week, okay, Detroit, who's playing better than I think a lot of people thought, they're not that great of a team. But then you got Nashville, who's tough, Columbus, who's tough, and then you go on a road trip again with the Rangers on a back-to-back coming off the Columbus game, and then Tampa, which is, what Tampa is, right? And then Florida and Carolina, that's probably a little bit easier portion of the stretch to round out the month of December. But this is not a good stretch of games. It's not going to be easy for them. And so they've got to do it now or forever hold your peace kind of thing. I mean, it's going to change if they either they got to get it done in the next 3-4 weeks.
They do. I'm looking at it. I'm just trying to find a little bit of positivity in this. And I feel like we've gone super negative, but in fairness, and I think this is a thing that the fans have felt, and I think this is why so many people are looking for an honest take on the team, which they don't necessarily get everywhere. It's a hard thing right now. I don't see them firing the coach. And I know that there are people who are, kind of waiting this thing out. I just don't see it happening. And so, if you've been in the Fire Hextall camp, I don't see it being a thing. I don't think it's a logical thing to happen. I don't even think it's there was a part of me, I think we had talked about this at the last home game, where I said, if you go out and you only get 3 points on this West Coast trip, then maybe there's some pressure. But I think at the same time, again, this comes back to Chuck Fletcher having to really evaluate things. Dave Hextall finally seems to have the liberty, or he seems to have been liberated, and he's allowed to run his system and run what he really wants and run the player personnel packages that he wants. He can set his lines the way he wants them, set his defensive pairings the way he wants them. And in fairness, sometimes that's not good. Like, we've seen Andrew McDonald reinserted in the lineup, and things have not gone well for AMAC. I feel like you need to give him a few more games and get a real idea of what exactly Dave Hextall is going to do with this roster. But then again, at any given point, Chuck Fletcher could finally decide that it's the moment to make a trade, and maybe the whole thing does kind of flip on its head. Like, maybe you go out and you shake up this core and you bring in somebody who is vocal, who is a vocal leader, who is somebody who is demonstrative on the ice, and is somebody who, I don't know, backs up their play with words and with actions, and I don't know. I don't know who that guy is, and I don't know what it'll take, but I do know that next week, or not next week, next year, we've got plenty of guys that are going to hit the open market, and the team has $30-35 million in cap space. So I don't want to see, I know that a lot of people want to see this team make the playoffs this year. Of course, I do as well. But I don't want to see them make a bad move for the sake of trying to, go for some kind of playoff run this year and then end up tying up money next, in next year and the year after. So I don't know. I guess we'll see how this works out.
Yeah, we will. We will.
We have a couple 5-star reviews, actually 3.
Oh!
We have 3 5-star reviews that I want to get to.
And I know one of them is going to be awesome.
One of them's amazing, and we need to give it the time that it really deserves. Of course, we'll be back at some point next week with a new show, and we'll, of course, break down more of the Flyers game stuff. But I think at this point, we'd be kind of doing people a disservice if we didn't kind of hit some of those main points that we did to lead off the show, especially because it's insight that you can't get anywhere else. So hopefully, if people were coming here waiting for a legitimate breakdown of the advanced stats on the last few games, you might not have gotten that this episode, but we'll be sure to come back at you with some game recaps. But in the meantime, we've got some 5-star reviews that we absolutely have to talk about. And of course, if you haven't done this yet, if you haven't gone on to iTunes and left a 5-star rating, you need to do that immediately. It's a big help to us. But if you can, also leave a review, because the reviews are what we really love to read. And I haven't been this excited to read a review in a while. Are you ready, my friend?
I can't wait.
Of course you are. All right. This one's by Things Are Looking Up. Like the dad I always wanted. Russ is good too. I've seen reviews call Anthony SanFilippo arrogant, but the reality is we're all just petulant teenagers who think we know better. But Anthony SanFilippo is always there like a wise dad saying, I told you so. But in a wise, fatherly way, not a total jerk-face way. I just wish Anthony SanFilippo would play catch with me. I never wrote an iTunes review before. Hopefully this gets me the fatherly attention I so desperately crave. My therapist says I tend to overshare in public forums. He also loves Snow the Goalie. It seriously really is the best. Thank you, Things Are Looking Up. That's fantastic.
That's maybe the best 5-star review we'll ever get. Ever. I mean, like ever. We might get 5-star reviews for the next 5 years. Nothing's going to top like the dad I always wanted.
Things Are Looking Up. I don't know who you are. I don't know if you're on Twitter, but I want you to reach out to us, and I want to set up you playing catch with Anthony.
Yeah, we should do it. We'll get a video. We have the new video guy, right, at Crossing Broad.
Oh, yeah. Who will be announced in a few weeks, I believe. So that's the thing. So yeah, we'll have to. That'll be some good content.
We'll set it up.
Hashtag content.
Have him. So Things Are Looking Up should contact us via Twitter. Just send us a message, either me or Russ. We'll set it up, and we'll do a whole thing where we'll talk hockey while we're playing catch, and we'll put it on video.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
All right, we have 2 more here. One is by Jack Dan, who says, best pod for inside view on the Flyers, 5 stars. Woo. Love this podcast. 2 exclamation points. It's a must listen to any Flyers fan. Ant was basically the Dave Spadaro of the Flyers, so he clearly still has tons of connections within the organization, which he has leveraged to break news on Hexy's ultimate firing, their chase of Stasny on July 1st, and the team's view of Morgan Frost. Russ's strange tangents are starting to grow on me, but I wish he would stop interrupting Anthony when he's on a roll. See, I addressed that in this episode, Anthony. You
let me go. Yeah.
He sometimes stops Anthony in the middle of an insiderish story to segue into some analogy, and they fail to get back to complete Ant's original story. Also, I wish Russ would stop with the immature bashing of Broad Street Hockey Radio. You waste valuable pod time bashing them. It's unnecessary. Let them do their thing, and you keep doing yours. Overall, I love the podcast, and the home of the Facebook Live Periscope shows are a must-watch too. Keep up the good work, guys. It's a nice review.
Love it.
It's a nice review.
Yeah, it's a good review.
I'm done bashing people.
It's fair.
This is all that I'm going to say. I'm done bashing people. I have been disappointed, and Anthony will never say this because Anthony's a pretty humble guy, even though some people think he's arrogant. I don't know why. But I think it's been not disheartening. Disheartening might be the wrong word. But to work with Anthony and to know that he's getting the scoops that he's getting and he's reporting it, and then to see like the general lack of respect that's shown to it by members of the beat, other sites that cover hockey, to never see his stuff linked to other readerships, I think is disingenuous. And I've seen enough and I've heard enough of people citing other writers who write something similar as long as or as late as a week after the fact, after Anthony first reports it. I just think it's doing readerships a disservice. I think it does listenerships a disservice. There have been times on the website that there are people that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of, and it's not just hockey, it's other sports as well. When we write stuff up, At Crossing Broad, we cite those people. We don't necessarily think they're the best at their respective jobs, but if they have a scoop first, we report it. That's what we do, because ultimately, whatever you think of the site, we try to be honest and we try to be genuine, and if somebody has a scoop, we try to report it as such. And I think that there are some people in the city who, for whatever reason, don't want to show that respect, and I think it's I find it upsetting. Anthony doesn't seem to; he just kind of brushes it off. But I don't think it's doing people the I don't even know what the word is. I'm just like kind of disgusted by it. I just don't think I don't think they're doing their people justice. I think at some point you just present it. Just present the news.
I'm not going to dwell on this. I hear what you're saying, and I don't think that you're wrong. I guess the reason that I brush it off is because I've been covering this hockey team now for the better part of 18 years. People know who I am. I don't feel like I need to be, jumping up and down saying, "Look at me, look at me, look at me."
That's my job.
Well, that's fine, and I get it. And I get it. So I mean, if people are going to find, if I write a story and I break a story, people are going to see it. People are going to find it. If nobody else wants to give me credit for it, I'm not looking for it. I'm just doing a job, right? I'm just doing the job that I'm getting paid for at Crossing Broad. I'm not looking for glory. I'm not looking for people to say, "Oh, Anthony's the best. Anthony this, Anthony that." That doesn't matter to me so much. So as long as people are seeing it, and I know people are seeing it, and we can tell based off of the traffic that we get to certain stories, the traffic that we're getting on the podcast, the traffic that we're getting on the Press Row show, we know people are seeing what we're doing, and so therefore, if someone else doesn't want to credit me, then they don't credit me. I get what you're saying, and you're not wrong, but I don't. It doesn't affect me, and I don't care as much about it as maybe you do.
This is my my only other thing before we move on, is that I think that when people try to marginalize or try to trivialize Anthony's sourcing on things, and people claim that they know who sources are or they have the same sources, all I would say is I think if people had the same sources that Anthony did, they would report something. And might I say that if those people happen to report something, it would probably be the first time they've ever done it, but we would still cite it, whether we like them or not, because that's doing the right thing. All right, last 5-star review. Of course, this one, the most recent, by Scott Hartnell's Lost Glove. The only Flyers podcast in Philadelphia, 5 stars. I stumbled across Snow the Goalie in the offseason when the hockey content is at a minimum and quickly fell in love with the show. Between guests, informative insights, and actual reporting, it can't be beat. Thanks, guys. Keep up the great job. I look forward to the show drop every week, and it has become a must-listen. We appreciate that. So big thank you to Jack Dan, to Things Are Looking Up, who wants to play catch with Anthony, and Scott Hartnell's Lost Glove. Huh.
That's
So
nice.
does that mean that we have one Scott Hartnell's glove? We have one accounted for, and one is lost?
Yeah.
It was lost, and now it's found. Hopefully, the Flyers will find some success in the next few games so that next week we can come back with a more positive show. Oh, speaking of shows, Anthony, do you want to hit people with a little bit of info?
Yeah, so I know we've been teasing this for a while, and I'm still going to be teasing it, but
It's part of why we didn't release a show last week. We thought there was a small chance that it was going to go off last week.
Right, and then we were asked to just wait until after the road trip. But we have confirmed not one, but 2 significant guests for Snow the Goalie.
Say it again, Anthony. How many significant guests?
2.
Say it louder for the people in the back.
We have 2 significant guests coming up for Snow the Goalie, and we will be recording them probably at the same time. We'll probably put them out in 2 separate episodes so that they get their just due. But we will be recording them simultaneously down at Skate Zone one day when they get back from the trip, and yeah, so as soon as they're back from the trip, we will have 2 significant guests. I'm excited to announce who they are, but I want to wait until they get back just to make sure that everybody's still employed. Let's put it that way. But both parties have agreed to be on the show, so that's exciting news. And I look forward to our next episode being the one that has at least one of them. But if not the next episode, certainly the one right after that.
Snow the Goalie. is, of course, the People's Podcast, the Players Podcast, the Breaking News Podcast, the Guests That Matter Podcast, and, of course, the podcast with the best fans, the best listeners, and those who we love and care about deeply. So, Anthony, it's been another fun episode. A little bit down. We're a little bit down, but the team hopefully will rebound as they finish out their West Coast swing. And of course, it will be exciting when we get to reveal the mystery guests. I think it's gonna blow some minds. And
it's pretty cool.
Could I say it might even be humongous big?
You and your Briz impersonation.
As much as I can, I'm gonna try to throw people off. Anyway, until our next episode, when we'll even do the return of Who's That Flyer. Can we play Who's That Flyer with the guests? Oh, maybe we could. Get them to read a 5-star review. That could be fun.
That would be.
Oh my God! What if
actually.
we get one of them to play catch with you at Skate Zone? Yes. Get Things Are Looking Up to meet us down at Skate Zone. Oh, this could be a great moment. Anyway,
there you go.
For Anthony, who you can find on Twitter at AntSanPhilly, I'm Russ at Joy on Broad. Go check out the other shows in Crossing Broad Podcast Network. You can find those links to those shows in the description of this episode, as well as every other episode. And of course, our Twitter handles are there. All you have to do is click on them on pretty much any podcast app, and you'll be redirected to our Twitter feeds. So follow us there. Keep the conversation going. And until the next game, you're going to be out, Tuesday? Tuesday's game, you won't be there. We'll have to do...
Right.
I'll have to put together a Press Row show with somebody else, or do it by myself. That would be sad.
I'm sure Meltzer will do it.
Meltzer was a nice guy. I liked having him on that last time that you
good.
weren't down there. And we'll definitely be reunited on Thursday for the Nashville game, so that'll be exciting. But until the Press Row show rides again, and until Snow the Goalie is back in your podcast feed, I'm Russ. That's Anthony. Thanks for listening. Check us out everywhere else, and check out the site for Anthony. Who knows? Will he break news? He probably will. Will it be huge? It probably will. So keep your eyes peeled there. Thanks for listening. We will talk to you again soon.